Dr. Ian Hendy from the University of Portsmouth. And Ian is a senior lecturer at the University of Portsmouth. He's a marine conservation ecologist and is going to be discussing the use of AI in fieldwork. And I particularly like the title of one of his recent papers that he led, which is Field Courses for Dummies. To what extent can ChatGPT design a higher education field course? So an interesting read for people to follow up there once Ian's presented today. So I'll hand over to you now, Ian.
Thank you, Naomi. Good morning. Actually, good afternoon, I suspect, in about a minute from now, everyone. So I was listening to Leslie's talk, and thank you for your talk there, Leslie. It was really insightful. And in fact, a lot of the things that we found during our research, which I'll talk about in a moment, of course, was the fact that there's a lot of nuances that ChatGPT doesn't recognize in terms of human expertise and depth and detail in designing these things. So these are the things that we found. So what I'm going to do now, of course, share my screen. Hopefully you can all see that.
Yeah.
There we go. Thank you, guys. So as Naomi said, so I am a tropical marine ecologist, in fact, spent many years in Indonesia, then moved over into the Caribbean and did lots of work over there. So essentially, when it comes to things like Chat GPT and AI, I am a dinosaur. I've had very little use of this. So in actual fact, coming into this with some colleagues of mine was really interesting because, as you can see here, we have Dr. Mark Tupper, myself, and Ruben Shipway. We decided to use, as an experiment, Chat GPT to see if we could design some field courses. And the reason why we decided to do this was because we do this a lot. So I managed lots of field expeditions in Indonesia and over in the Caribbean. 20 years experience of that all told. So lots of experiences running these things, and of course locally in the UK as well. And the same for my colleagues Mark and Ruben. So we've had lots of experience doing this, but very little experience using AI. So we had a conversation one day and we thought, you know what, I wonder if we could use Chat GPT to develop an outline of a course that would be just as good as an experienced field researcher could do. So this is what this talk is going to be about in terms of what we're going to find out today. So as you can see here, this is our paper, and easily accessible online. And so we investigated the use of AI in course design in terms of developing expeditions and field courses for students at universities. And so what we wanted to do was to see if this could be a really good time-saving device, of course, with increased workloads for people and things. For ChatGPT's role, of course, you can see here in educational fieldwork planning. And we gave it lots of different iterations, in fact. And what we decided to do was test a known existing trip that we run already, and we tried to create a new one. Okay, so we gave it different options and different tasks in actual fact. And what we found was that the outputs actually were quite interesting. That it created some really nice teaching and activity ideas that in some instances that we hadn't thought about in terms of the different assessments that you would give in a field trip, if that was for a week or 2 weeks. So there were some different activities that we didn't think about. It structures objectives very well, and assessments and rubrics. So the outline of those were very structured. We'll talk about the things that it did less good in a moment, and that was quite interesting in actual fact. And of course, as I say, what this does is actually reduce workload modeling. And we found this because it produces outlines and schedules absolutely right away. But what you do have to do is fact check them, okay, in terms of the details. And what we did find in actual fact particularly when we're sort of linking in with tropical ecology and tropical stuff. What it didn't do was factor in things like dangerous animals, for example. So you have to sort of be careful with risk assessment and risk assessments analysis. So that's where the human expertise really comes into this. It's really good at developing objectives. It's really good at assignments. So designing specific assignments each day that the students can do and outlining different schedules that you can do each day. And again, there are some caveats to that, which we'll be talking about as well. So in terms of, let's call it real world awareness of creating field trips, what we did find, of course, we would set, let's say we're going to take a field trip to Slapton Lay, Devon, and what it would do was assign field trips that we would need at low tide, but it would give them at high tide. All these little nuances it didn't factor in. And of course, travel time and logistics. So I think one course that we designed, which was on the west coast of, actually it was in Wales, North Wales, and rather than give us the quickest time possible, it gave a travel time of something like 26 hours. So if you're not fact checking it, all these things could go south very, very quickly, in actual fact. And it also gives some incorrect information as well. So that was interesting. So you have to really fact check what it's giving you in terms of the information. And of course, as I say, it overlooks safety as well. So in terms of risk assessments, these things were completely overlooked, particularly if you're working, of course, with marine biology and coastal environments. You've got to be careful, of course, with mud falling in, life jackets, those sorts of things, and dangerous animals if it's tropical. These things it didn't provide. So this we found very interesting. We had to kind of iterate this information into it and fold this information into it before it would come out with a reasonable output for us to use. So of course, what this needs is some really good fact checking with experts in the field to look at this. So a bit of human quality control, if you will. So the potential of AI then in fieldwork planning, it can produce some really nice prototypes of different ideas that you may not have thought of. So this is quite interesting, depending on what you want to do and what you want to achieve in your field course. What we do this, we have tropical field trips, we have lots of temperate field trips, and we have assessments on some of the days, and then we have mini projects. And these ideas can be produced using AI quite well, in actual fact. It can give really nice personalized learning pathways for the students. And it can provide interdisciplinary planning, of course, so lots of different activities it can include. And this is really, we found this really, really interesting, in actual fact. It can make fieldwork more adaptive. So things that you may not have thought of that it can give in terms of what subjects you could do and deliver, in actual fact. So if you don't have any experts reviewing this and fact checking it, you could go wrong in terms of using the blueprint of your field trip for the students. So you have to be really careful to make sure that you got the right tides. If we're going abroad, have you assessed the risk assessment for dangerous animals? And do you have the right safety equipment, for example? So all these things that you do have to fact check and basically feed this in an iterative process with ChatGPT. And we found this because if you give it poor or vague prompts, that the information that it will deliver back to you will be just as vague and poor, in actual fact. So you have to give it lots of detail. And I think when I came into the discussion about half an hour ago, someone said, sorry, I didn't see the name who said this. I found it was really interesting in that you have to give it a really detailed account with lots of information in. Completely agree. So the more information you give it, the more direction it has and the more accurate output it will give you. So give it an iterative approach, in actual fact. So context rich prompts with what you want to achieve. So if you're if your field trip is into tidal, for example, you want to make sure that you factor in those tide times, when the low tides are, when the high tides are, for example. And of course, factor in things like health and safety and risk assessments. So these are really important issues, of course, that if you don't fold that into it, it's going to miss those points. And of course, what you have is a course that doesn't have that due diligence associated with it. So what we found is that you could use AI as a sort of co-pilot, as a bit of a wingman, if you will, to give you a bit of extra time. But essentially, the take-home message is you need that human experience to deliver those projects. So just to sort of cross-check and fact-check with what you're saying. So you have to start with a clear, I guess, logical ingredients lists of what, where, when, who, that type of thing. So as long as you got those details and exactly what you want and an idea of the concepts and tasks that you want to achieve, and as long as you know and aware of where you're going, you can factor that into that recipe, if you will. Then you feed that into the model, ask it, and it should add that into it. And as I say, a bit of iterative prompting, but the more information you give it first, the clearer and more adaptive and more accurate the output is. So again, self-review. So look at the first drafts of these things when it's giving you the different ideas, then cross-check it, of course, with other fellow experts. So we did find that they were the final outputs, once we did give it all this information, were quite similar to the human designs and human outputs, with myself, Mark and Ruben looking over these. But as I say, it did miss some key logistical outputs. As I say, scheduling activities at low tide, for example, it didn't do that. So if you don't know the site well, of course, and you plan your trip, and of course you go there and you want to do some intertidal surveys, you want to do some shoreline surveys, profiles, and those sorts of things, and rocky shore intertidal zoning. If you've got high tide there, you can't do it, of course. So these things that you have to add in. And so it needs a bit of a hybrid with humans sort of looking at this with more information. The more you feed it, the better it goes. So it is a good tool. And this is coming from a person that, as I say, I'm very much heavily involved in field work, and I'm a field ecologist. So AI is very new to me. So it can work as long as you give it all the information that it requires, thinking of all those aspects. So it adds depth, and you create those nuances with everything that we do, of course, working in the field, that Chat GPT won't have. So you need to add that to it. And so what you need to do is create a bit of an ingredients list, if you will. And so as long as you give it all the information and you think of all that information, so you need to sort of get some trusted colleagues and think, right, okay, we're going to have this field trip and we want to have day one, we're going to look at muddy ecosystems and we're going to look at carbon content. Day two, we're going to look at exposed shores and rocky intertidal. Day three, we're going to look at subtidal kelp forests. Then the rest of the week, we're going to do some mini projects, for example. And so what you need to do is factor in all the health and safety issues, any potential animals that are involved in that, what the high tides are, what the low tides are, all of these things. Press go, do the due diligence, and then do some adaptive management from that to see if it's not quite right or if it is correct. Then you can fact check it and then go again. And so what you're doing then essentially is validating that. But again, going on the point half an hour ago, completely agree, is that the more information you give it first, and the more accurate the data that you give it, the better it will be in terms of that activity. So you don't have to keep adding those suggestions in. And then, of course, you want to involve experts into this, so that they need to look at this and say, well, actually, is this field trip actually doable? And is it feasible? Where we're going from where we're leaving from a site to the destination, is that feasible in the time? All those things that you need to factor in, of course. So AI, of course, there's no stopping it, and it will become a common support tool in academia. but I think, of course, we just need to use it as a support tool. And again, hearing the discussion where academia can, students go from A to C and miss out B, completely agree. So it's really used as a tool, perhaps using for time-saving devices and those sorts of things, but not to actually incur and impede knowledge. That's really important, of course, absolutely important. And again, this point here is more for me really, because I'm very new to AI and Chat GPT and its usage, and I found this very interesting when we did this paper last year, in what it can achieve, and I found it very surprising. So I think a bit of training for faculty would be really, really interesting. Thank you for your time, everybody.